Strange, but true stories. Tales from the light side, the dark side, and the other side. I'm Steve White. You know, we've met some really interesting characters in the past few years here on this channel. One of those is a person we called the Hunter. He was this otherworldly guy who assisted folks in their battle with demons and entities that most of us regular folks don't have the misfortune to run into. The two previous stories we shared with you both took place in St. Louis. But recently, we received a story that takes place elsewhere. The person who sent it to us gave us pieces of information that we've withheld in the previous stories that led us to believe the Hunter roams the country, and even in his so-called retirement, still helps out wherever he can. This story was submitted to us by a viewer just like you. I was recently listening to stories like the ones you tell on your channel when I came across your story of the entity and the Hunter. The story reminded me of an encounter I had with a guy in a town I used to live in. It was October 2008. I lived in a small Arizona town named San Manuel. I was 33 at the time and had only been in the U.S. for about 15 years. I was born in Mexico. My dad moved us to San Manuel north of Tucson in 2000 after my father got work in the San Manuel mines. San Manuel had the largest mining operation in the country at one point. My dad had worked in the San Manuel mines for years until it closed in 2003. My dad was always pretty smart when it came to money. He always put some back, so when the mine closed in 2003, we were okay for a few years. Then a plastics company opened up in town, and Dad went to work for them. In 2008, I was going to Pima Community College to get a degree in programming. I tried many jobs, but computers was really my passion. Dad said he had no problem with me focusing on college. I got married, but it didn't last, and my first wife and I split up, and I just needed a fresh start. My mom had died in a car accident in 2007, so it was just me, my dad, and my little brother, who was in high school at the time. Now, on this particular night, Dad was working the late shift, and my brother was staying the weekend at a friend's house. I had a lot of studying to do, so I decided to stay home for the night and catch up on some of that studying. Around 7 o'clock, I started to get hungry and decided I would walk up to the gas station and grab a sub from the subway that was just inside. It was just a few blocks away, and it wouldn't take me long. The moment I walked out of the house, though, I felt weird, like I was being watched. I walked out into the yard, and I heard a whistle from next door. It was Ricardo, my neighbor. Now, Ricardo was what I guess you would call old school. Some may have just called him weird, but he was mostly harmless. He was very spiritual and very superstitious. He called me over and he told me in Spanish, "Boy, you do not want to be on the streets tonight. It's less than 2 weeks to Halloween and the moon is full. The spirits say it is not safe tonight." I was never a superstitious person or anything like that. I figured he was just being his usual weird self, and I told him that I was just going a little ways up the street to get something to eat, and I'd be all right. So I went on my way to get my sandwich. Now, San Manuel was not the most happening place at that time. It was mostly dead. There were not many street lights, and there was a constant worry of coyotes and even mountain lions. So I figured I'd cut through the First Avenue schoolyard. It's fenced in, but hopping the fence was easy, it saved time, and once inside the fence, I'd be safe from wild animals. Now, a lot of schools in Arizona are designed where the classrooms open to the outside. They look more like motels than schools, really. So I'm cutting across the schoolyard, and I heard a child laughing. I stopped and looked around. The school was dark, and there wasn't anybody that I could see. But then I heard it again, coming from between two buildings. The sound of a child laughing. This school is said to be haunted by a little boy that fell off a merry-go-round, though the people who claim to have encountered this childish ghost tell of hearing crying, not laughing, and seeing a little boy holding his head before vanishing. I didn't hear any crying, and I didn't see any apparition. But I also did not want to linger either. I picked up the pace and started walking towards the other side of the yard. I looked down at the ground, and there, keeping pace with my shadow, was the shadow of a small figure. I stopped again and looked around for whatever figure may be close enough to be casting a shadow in the moonlight. And there was nobody there. I heard the child laughing again, this time closer. I was not a believer in ghosts at the time, but I wasn't taking any chances. I took off running for the fence on the other side of the schoolyard, jumped it, and got the heck away from there as quickly as I could. I cut down an alley to shorten my trip even more. I know what you're thinking. I just escaped what could have been a ghost, and now I'm walking down a dark alley. I know that now, but then I just wanted to get to the gas station, grab my sub, and get back home. I slowed back down to a quick walk and got about halfway down the alley when I heard a low growl from behind me. It sort of sounded like a dog, but then again, it didn't. I suppose I was only hoping it was a dog. I kept moving, but turned to see if I could see what was growling at me, and I saw a shadowy figure move behind one of the dumpsters. I was not alone in this alley. Boy, I am really going to have to listen to Ricardo, my crazy neighbor, next time when he says to stay at home. I kept moving to the end of the alley, but the growling only got louder and more menacing. I passed by one of those green plastic trash cans that garbage companies provide you to put your garbage in and roll out to the street. Well, right after I passed it, it fell over. Or it's better to say, it got knocked over, and not by me. Now I'm truly scared. Something is in this alley with me, and it's stalking me. I got near the end of the alley when I heard it walk out onto the gravel. I turned around and saw what looked like a big black wolf. But this thing was huge. It was easily the size of 2 German shepherds standing on each other. Just as it was about to pounce on me, it stopped, and then began to cower back, lowering its head and making a low, guttural growling sound. Not the menacing sound from before, but a low, guttural sound. I'm scared to look behind me, but something has to be there because this wolf, or whatever this thing is, sure ain't scared of me. As I slowly turned my head, still keeping my eyes on the wolf as best I can, I noticed an extra shadow on the garage to my right. This wolf-like creature just took off, and I looked behind me to see a white guy with a cane standing at the end of the alley. He asked if I was okay, and I told him, no, not really. There's been a lot of freaky stuff happening tonight, and I've only been outside a few minutes. But thanks for scaring that thing off. He said, you picked a bad time to be out walking these streets at night. Yep, got it. I've been figuring that out in the past few minutes. I just wanted something to eat at Subway. Instead, I'm about to get eaten like I was the $5 footlong. He laughed and said he was going to pick up cigarettes at the gas station convenience store. He said he'd walk with me to the store if I wanted, kind of a safety in numbers thing. I sure as heck don't want to run into anything like whatever that was again, so sure, I appreciate the company. It was a short walk, but we happened to talk about a bunch of stuff in that short period of time. We talked about my dad moving us here from Mexico and how he had moved his wife and kids here from St. Louis. Now, as I've stated, I'm a Mexican, living in Arizona and walking with this white guy with a goatee, a bandana on his head, a Manson t-shirt, and walking with a handmade wooden cane due to a really bad limp. It was the safest I'd ever felt. We got to the store, I ordered my sandwich, he bought his cigarettes and a Pepsi. He left the store and told me to have a good night. I thanked him and paid for my sandwich. As I was leaving the store, I saw him again, standing outside, but he was staring up the street. I looked to see what he was looking at, and there in the distance was a really tall figure of a man. It was about 3 blocks away, but it was so dark. It stood out against the darkness of the night. It didn't move, it just stood there. Again, this guy who had been my protector for the last few minutes looked at me and said, "Really bad night. Figured I'd walk you home. It's not safe out here." And once again, I was thankful and gladly accepted the company. I told him that I hoped he didn't think I was a coward or anything. He said, "Nah, I get it. Most people aren't built for dealing with this kind of stuff." As we walked along, I noticed the shadow was still there, and we were walking straight towards it. I asked him why he wasn't scared, and that's when he opened up and told me his story. He said he'd been dealing with this stuff his whole life, and it was the big reason why he walked with a cane now. I looked up and noticed that the shadow was gone. I mentioned it to him, and he said, "Yeah, it was trying to scare you, but realized it wasn't going to scare me." We got to the house, and I offered him a beer. He accepted, and we sat on the porch and talked for a while longer. We spent the next hour talking like old friends. It took a couple of beers, but I got him to talk about his past with the supernatural. He talked about how he banished what he called entities from houses, assisted and even performed some exorcisms, saved people from haunted places where they had no business being, helped the police on a few cases back in St. Louis. To be honest, I thought he was making it all up. After a while, he said he needed to get back home, and we called it a night. Now, granted, this isn't a scary story or as scary as some of the stories you've told on your channel, but if this was the guy that you called the Hunter, I thought I should share it. I started connecting the pieces after watching the 2 videos on your channel. He mentioned while we were talking that night that vampires were real, and that he used to work at a place called Steak and Shake. That meant nothing till I watched your videos. He did mention some haunted places in St. Louis, like Limp Mansion, Zombie Road, and some town south of St. Louis I can't remember the name of now. He talked about having died 4 times and having all of these surgeries because of his battles with these demons or entities. He said he gave up what he called the life, left St. Louis to find something he'd lost, and he did. Then he married her and retired. The only reason I remember so much about him is I've never met anyone like him. He's not someone you easily forget. Oh, and this is kind of funny. With all of the creatures and scary stuff he's encountered, he said the only thing he's really scared of is driving. Says people are way too casual behind the wheel. Too many die from it. I agreed, given the driver that killed my mom was texting when he crashed into her. I saw him once or twice around town after that meeting. He was always with his family, and we would just nod at each other and go about our business. He seemed to be doing okay. Some time later, he moved away from San Manuel, and the mostly dead town really did die after that. Of course, that could also be due to the plastics plant burning down in 2010. My dad still lives there. I moved to Tucson. I visit Dad from time to time, but never at night. That place is more scary now than it used to be. This has been another strange but true story sent to us by a viewer like you. Now, we can't say for certain that this is indeed the Hunter from the earlier 2 stories, but there are some striking similarities. We also withheld some information from this story that we use to verify whether the story is actually about the Hunter or not. This story happened about 10 years ago, and a lot can happen in that time, but if you have had an encounter with this demon hunter, either while he was in full service or maybe after retirement, or someone similar, we'd love to hear about it. Send us an email to strangebutTrueStories2@gmail.com. Subscribe if you haven't already, and sign up for notifications in the upper right corner. Let us know what you thought of this video in the comments below. And as always, your support is greatly appreciated. Thanks for watching. I'm Steve White. Until next time.